Welcome to the Rock Guitar Confidential Podcast with Ryan and Scott. Hey, are you tired of going to concerts where there's lots of beautiful women everywhere? Well, lucky for you, today we're going to delve into the world of prog. There's no girls here. Yeah, you know, it's funny, no matter how much CPU power you have on a computer, it's never enough. It's always, you could use 10% more always. It's like, it reminds me of distortion on a distortion channel. It's like, it's cool, but I could use like 10% more.
There's never enough.
Or so they say.
Or so they say. That's a great song.
It is a great song. I mean, the lyrics are brilliant on that.
Dude, it's totally just rising to the forefront of true. Your consciousness.
Yeah, with no regrets. It moves along. All right, so... but no, the distortion, like I always feel that way with like a distortion sound, like especially for like a lead thing, I want to have a little bit more gain. Like you ever played an amp that doesn't quite have enough distortion? Like you keep turning the gain knob and it hits the top and there's like nothing, it won't go past. Like, no.
There's a ton. Well, and then depending on how, I mean, hopefully your pickups have enough output to drive the front end of that amp.
Yeah, but depending on the amp, some amps I find are very like compressed and have a nice fat sound, and some amps are much more like very punchy. And there's like no sustain. Like a lot of old Marshalls are like that. You have to really whack the strings, get the sound there.
Yeah.
And it won't sustain or it won't deal with legato at all. If you try and do like any hammers and pulls, like that does not have anything to support that at all. You know, and I think that explains when you listen to the people who were playing a lot of those kind of, you know, they don't play that way. They don't have the legato feel. I think if Eddie hadn't done the Variac, we would never figure that out. You know what I mean? It's crazy. So.
Well, more thanks to Eddie then.
Yeah,
yes,
exactly.
Wholeheartedly agree.
Because I think he's the only person who ever used the Variac. I'm pretty sure, right? There's never existed in history till him. I'm like that's the lore that's going on, right?
Yes, and, you know, we'll have to dig into that too a little bit more about, you know, what a Variac is and what it does to the amp. And
basically it gives your amp a little warmer sound with a slight more compression and a little bit more fatness to it. You know what I mean? It's crazy. But anyway, that's not what we're talking about. This
all right, all you Variacs out there.
Yeah.
Welcome back to Rock Guitar Confidential with
Ryan and Scott. I be the Scott part. He is the...
I am the Ryan part.
You got it.
As always.
And today's topic, guys, this is going to be very exciting for everybody, is what is prog?
Yes, all of our listeners are going to be really stoked about
excited.
that.
Like, I'm a huge prog fan. All right.
Right. Well, hey, that's the nature of prog music. It's very niche-y.
Yeah. And what's funny is I feel like a bunch of different sort of artists and bands that are really nothing to do with each other all get kind of stitched together under the prog label. It's like, that's a prog thing. I'm like, okay, what's prog? Okay, prog is
short for the word progressive.
Yeah, exactly. But like you'll hear like Yes is prog, or King Crimson is prog, and then prog, and then Dream Theater's prog.
Gentle Giant was prog.
You know what I'm saying? Like Spock's Spirit is prog. You know what I mean? It's like, but none of those bands have anything to do with the other of them. You know, like Fate's Warning's prog, but so is, you know, Gentle Giant. You know, it's so strange.
So here's a good question. What's the difference between prog and fusion?
There's a huge difference, actually. I think prog actually still respects songs, if that makes sense. There's still like hooks and choruses. If you listen to any classic Yes, you're going to hear all that. To me, quintessential prog band. You know, that kind of is like then maybe Genesis. You could throw like old school Genesis in there.
We've got to mention Rush. Let's get that
Rush
out of the way.
Came a little later though. Rush is kind of prog metal. They're like the first prog metal band, I would say.
Well, they're not really metal.
Well, I mean, they prog hard rock, I guess I would say. They have
hard prog rock.
Yeah, because we listen to like
prog rock hard.
When you listen to Steve Howe era, Yes, there's like
rock?
not a lot of crunchy rock guitars in that. They're very much, you know, relatively clean guitars, you know, that are played in a rock style, but it's like old school. It's like 50s style rock. It's not like rock. Rush was the first band like crank up Marshalls and do like heavy rock guitar sounds, you know, and then do prog stuff with that, you know. So they kind of are the jumping off point for bands like, you know, it would be more in the kind of music we like, the Symphony X's, Dream Theater's, Queensryche, Fate's Warning. Those guys are like direct lineage. King Diamond is operatic. It's kind of a little bit of this.
It's a little proggy.
I would say it's definitely a little proggy for sure, but it's a little bit like hard to define.
It's more focused into like a horror metal.
Yeah, theatrical, operatic, power metal.
Yes,
sort of
but definitely, especially when Mickey D was playing drums, there was some interesting. There are interesting changes in the songs.
Yeah. I'm a huge fan of King Diamond, as are you. I think everybody knows that. But
well, just in case it wasn't clear, I'm a huge King Diamond.
This is the conundrum, though, when you try and talk to someone about prog, though, is like, what does that mean? Because prog can mean different things to different people. So to me, when I think of prog, I think of bands from that Rush sort of line. That's what I think of prog as being.
King Crimson's a great one.
King Crimson, I think of King Crimson, Genesis is like the progenitors of prog. Those are like the first prog
And
bands.
you're talking Peter Gabriel Genesis.
Yes, not the Phil Collins. Although the first couple of Phil Collins Genesis ones were still kind of proggy too.
Yeah, totally.
So, and even some of the stuff like Marillion, which is sort of influenced by Genesis, is very much in that sort of early Phil Collins Genesis version, which is still great. I'm a huge fan of Marillion. It's a great band. But anyway, I think if we kind of define what I think prog is sort of like rock music. It's not trying to be jazz. It's not trying to be pop. It's not trying to be country. It's just trying to be rock, but definitely taking it up a notch in terms of the complexity, the song structure, and the instrumental virtuosity of the players in the band,
and the lyrical content.
It's a little bit more thoughtful. Definitely more thoughtful than your average thing, which is why I think so many bands can fall under that heading. I think nowadays when people say prog, it's almost indistinguishable from like instrumental wankery. It's kind of become like that's basically what it means. There's a lot of wankery on this. You know what I mean? Does that seem like a fair thing to say? I mean, I don't know.
Well, when you say wankery, I think about one of my other favorite guitar players, and that's Nigel Tufnell. His wankery was above all wankery.
But that's, when we talk to someone who's like under 20 and say prog, they go, oh, Polyphia, Chon, that kind of, that's what Animals as Leaders.
Would you say that Iron Maiden's kind of prog?
Iron Maiden's got definitely their newer stuff's way more prog than their older stuff. Like their newer, they have like 15-minute songs. I think one common thing that you'll see is there's a lot of different movements in structures of the songs in prog music. They tend to be longer. So have like a 20-minute song, 15-minute song with 2 or 3 movements.
Metallica used to be kind of proggy.
Yep, around the And Justice for All era.
Yeah, And Justice for All is very proggy.
Yeah, it is. It's true. And then even like Megadeth on like Rust in Peace, there's a lot of proggy elements to that too. You know what I mean?
Sure. Once you've got Marty Friedman in the band, I think you get to say you're proggy.
And Cacophony would definitely be very proggy for sure. So I think that by that definition, I think the band has to have a high degree of instrumental virtuosity. They have to have songs that are maybe not traditional structures, that are longer perhaps, and with maybe a little bit more thoughtful lyrics. But there's no lack of melodic content. There's a lot of melodies. There's a lot of choruses. Mm-hmm. It's still rock music. It's not trying to not be rock music. You know what I mean?
Yes, pushing boundaries.
I think one definition I heard someone say on some documentary was that it's like it wasn't jazz musicians slumming it. It's rock musicians pushing their boundaries. That's kind of what prog is. You know what I mean? And it's important to understand that because whenever I hear someone throw around the word fusion, like I don't know that I've really ever heard jazz rock fusion. I've heard people tell me that what I'm listening to is jazz rock fusion, but what it sounds like is jazz. It doesn't really sound like rock at all. You know what I mean?
Al Di Meola's first couple albums sound like rock, pushing the boundary. It doesn't sound like jazz at all.
No, I agree. That's the only ones I've ever heard that I could say that.
Mahavishnu Orchestra doesn't sound like jazz.
I've never heard any Mahavishnu that sounded like rock, though.
Well, but it also isn't jazz either.
It's kind of some weird place in between. But a lot of stuff, like one player I look at as the gold standard of the fusion player is Mike Stern.
Okay.
And when I listen to Mike Stern, I can't stand Mike Stern, man. I'll be honest with you. I remember when I was in music school, he came into the clinic at MI. And I remember we got out of class. We actually, our Harmony and Theory class, said, hey, we're going to go down to the P100 building, or P100, which is the big performance venue, and we're going to watch Mike Stern. I'm like, oh, this is going to be great. I hear he's an awesome fusion player. And we went and watched, and it was just a jazz concert. Like, there was nothing rock about any of it. You know what I mean? And I think... It's funny, I saw a review of one of his records in Guitar World, and it's just absolutely summed up exactly the way I felt about him. He said, this is the reviewer in Guitar World, said, the language of the rock guitar player suits Mike Stern exactly the same way the English language suits Arnold Schwarzenegger. It's like, like he doesn't rock, and he purports to grew up listening to Hendrix and stuff. I'm like, okay, I don't hear any of that in your playing. I don't hear any rock in your playing at all. I hear like a lot of jazz. I don't hear any rock. You know what I mean? Okay. And most fusion I've been exposed to, which is quite a lot. I spent a few years really digging into fusion, but most of it is really like 80-20 jazz to rock, and it's like basically to my mind it's jazz with like a fuzz box on. You know what I mean? It's
interesting. So I when I was a kid growing up at Guitar Player Music, there was a lot, especially the older guys in the shop. That's how I know who Gentle Giant was. Mm-hmm. Right,
that's a prog band though.
Or King Crimson, John McLaughlin stuff, Return to Forever, Chick Corea, the Di Meola stuff, the Ravi Shankar stuff, and I don't think of any of that as being mostly jazz. I just think it's music without boundaries. I really do, because I don't listen to jazz.
What bummed me out about it is it was no rock to it, though. You know what I mean?
There was some. I think so.
I don't know, man.
I'll bet we'll have to. This will have to be a future episode. We'll have to. I'll select
Tony
some
Williams'
cuts.
Lifetime. I hear getting thrown in that, and it's like, yeah, but there's no rock there, man. It's at all. It's like, I guess like what I'm looking for is riffs and heaviness. You know what I mean? And there's like they don't have the balls like that. There's no balls in their playing at all.
There's definitely some.
Demiola is the one exception.
Demiola is a total exception.
Yeah.
There's definitely some. I don't know. Well, I'm not sure what kind of gonads would be in some of the McLaughlin stuff, but
I've listened to a bunch of the Mahavishnu stuff, and I think it's great playing. I wouldn't say it's rock, though.
Okay, I also wouldn't, but I also wouldn't say it's jazz either.
It's closer to jazz than it is rock.
It doesn't remind me of anything that I'd pull out of my real book.
No, I agree. It's not standards or anything like that, but it's definitely
not at all.
It's definitely not rock, though. That's the thing and I think one thing that I really wouldn't say struggled with when I was like younger, like studying jazz, but I remember like wondering like where are the melodies and hooks. When I get into the real book, I actually hear great songs. There's actually great songs in the real book.
Oh God, yeah.
But then I hear like what people were doing, like they call free jazz or like the fusion stuff. I'm like, this is just a bunch of guys jamming. This isn't really. There's no music here. You know what I mean? There's a bunch of just dudes jamming out.
Or the music is only for the dudes making it.
Yes, exactly. And I remember thinking like, well, where's the melodies? Where's the hooks? Where's the heads? Even like Duke Ellington had tons of melody. You know what I mean? It's like this stuff is just a bunch of just wankery. That's what it just struck me as. And I remember thinking like, well. That's one of the reasons I ended up not ultimately becoming a fusion player. I missed the ballsy and heaviness, the rock and rollness of it, because there's none of it. And I missed like songcraft. I want to hear melodies and hooks. You know what I mean? That's something that just for whatever reason jazz decided that they don't have to worry about melodies and hooks.
Yeah, there's definitely a groove that I need to have.
Yeah,
in most
I've heard a bunch of fusion that actually does have when I listen to fusion that's not trying to be rock, but it's got a little bit of an R&B thing to it. I kind of dig that. Because there's actually cool grooves and some interesting. And I think the chord harmony is a little less complex, and it allows for more melodic content when that happens. You know what I mean?
Yep.
More like accessible melodic content. You can play melodic content over any kind of chord harmony, but accessible, like something that you could hum. You know what I mean? It's not trying to land on weird chord tensions and things like that. You know
it doesn't just sound like spurts of chromaticism.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know. This probably coming off to sound like a lagging jazz. I've always missed the songcraft part of it. So when I think of Prog, though, I think of Prog has the songcraft part of it. They actually have elements of the fusion part, but then they're bringing in the songcraft too, and it does sound like rock. It doesn't sound like it's trying to be a jazz band. It sounds like it's trying to be a rock band.
So if a person wanted to explore getting into prog as a genre, what would your list be?
Well, I mean, it depends on what kind of prog fan you are. At the end of the day, like there's a bunch of different ways of looking at prog. So to me, like if you're looking at like prog, rock, I would say you gotta start with Genesis, King Crimson.
Okay.
That's kind of the progenitors. And then I look at a band like Rush would be the next one on that list. Listening to that kind of thing. And then if you get into more of the metallic thing, to me, it's Queensryche, Dream Theater, Fate's Warning. Those guys are like the quintessential, maybe Watchtower, throw that band in there, quintessential prog metal bands, and for the more modern stuff, if you're into the more modern stuff, then you got to probably listen to like Periphery, Animals as Leaders. Those guys are doing, I think Periphery is probably the best of those bands because there is some degree of care about songcraft and melodies in that band. It's not just let's go play as crazy stuff as we can for as long as we can.
It's not just being as obtuse as possible.
Yeah, exactly. Let's find the most angular way to make sure.
You took the words right out of my mouth.
Exactly. I mean, that's what it seems like. That's what they're after.
There needs to be a band in that ilk called Angulator. Doesn't that sound great?
Tim Ripper Owens running at the end of the
Right, that's the New Judas Priest album, Angulator.
But I think that's my list. I would say is that
their first album could be called The Star Angled Banner.
There was a few bands.
Oh, that was good.
That was very good. I'm not trying to knock you down.
I'm just trying to do my comedy there.
But I think I told you about the Magna Carta Records thing. There's a few bands that came out, like I think Cairo, Shadow Gallery, Magellan. There's a few bands like that came out in like the late 90s that were really cool. Liquid Tension Experiment, very, very cool stuff. Although I kind of think of Liquid Tension Experiment as being a part of Dream Theater because it's mostly all the same guys. You know what I mean? But I feel like prog.
Ooh. Control Denied.
Yeah, that's death metal-ish sort of. You know what I mean?
That was Chuck Schuldiner kind of prog metal project.
I agree. I mean, there's a lot of, even in death, there's a lot of prog.
Yeah,
you know I mean?
Totally.
But that being said, the vocals are very death metal. You know, and Control Denied had more normal vocals.
Yeah. So that fits more into the prog metal.
Yep, I agree with that. I like that band a lot, actually.
Loved it. It was sadly just one album.
Chuck got sick. You know, what can you do? You know.
Yep.
I think of that group, probably the most famous of those bands, if the modern bands, is probably Dream Theater. I think those guys probably have the biggest following of all the more modern. And to me, that's like the gold standard for prog metal, is that band. But I've, like I said before, I think Queensryche and Fates Warning are right around. And Queensryche, for some strange reason, always gets kind of lumped in with like the hair metal bands because they had a couple of big radio hits. But I really think of those guys very much as a prog metal band. You know what I mean? If you listen to most of their, like, Promised Land album is a very proggy album. You know what I mean? Even Empire, there's lots of progginess on that. You know what I mean? Even there's singles, but then there's progginess. Fates Warning, I've already long said my love for that band. I think that band is incredible. Pleasant Shade of Grey is such a great prog record. It's killer. And then another band I really like is Spock's Beard. That band was really, really interesting. Not as heavy as I would like. Flower Kings is another one that's pretty cool.
Does Porcupine Tree?
Yeah, Porcupine Tree is very cool.
They're very prog.
I like that band too. I wish they had more heaviness, and I wish they were a little bit more instrumentally adept, if that makes sense. I wish there was more solos going on, but I've heard the singer of that band, Stephen Wilson, talk before, and he's not a big fan of like playing a lot of guitar like that, which is unfortunate, because I think his music would benefit from it.
I think most of the people that I know who are huge Porcupine Tree fans are drummers. So I don't know if they're. I don't know Porcupine Tree's music very well, but yeah.
I mean, I think that's a good band. I definitely do. I definitely. From a songwriting perspective, I think it's pretty interesting, and I think from a production perspective, it's interesting. It's very interesting music. I wish that. I think Steven is one of those guys that has never wanted to be a monster player, so he's never really developed his technique very much. So his soloing capabilities are pretty limited, in terms of what he's able to do. But he still does a lot with it. And
which means that his feel capabilities are limited.
Exactly.
Just to harken back to a prior topic.
His options for what he can do are limited too, which is unfortunate. You know what I mean? But I don't know. I think, but a very good band. I think if someone who's looking to get into prog, those are all kind of bands. I think the challenge is that, that's why you asked what would I recommend? Like, well, what's prog? What are you looking for? Because prog can be different things to different people. So some people, Tool is prog. You know what I mean? That to some people's minds. You know what I mean?
How would Dave Matthews Band fit into this conversation?
Dave Matthews Band is like a weird thing that kind of straddles the line between like folk, like pop, and like prog. Because but the only reason they seem prog is they have some odd time signatures in their stuff that they play. Yep. And then they also have those really extended improvisational sections, which
and terrible vocals. Yeah. So that
I like Dave's vocals, man.
What? How can you like Dave's vocals?
You got your gun,
it's just another shade of Eddie Vedder.
I don't agree with that.
I'll die on that.
That's
hill.
okay. I'm a fan of Dave Matthews, and
I've seen him live, and they're great. I just wish they'd hire a singer, and then I could wholeheartely like them.
I'm not going to agree with you on this one, Ryan. I'm sorry, man.
I
hate when that happens. You know what I mean?
No, that's okay, man. It adds the variety is the spice of the podcast.
Exactly right.
Yeah. Thanks for listening to the Rock Guitar Confidential podcast with Scott and Ryan. Hope you're all having a nichey good time out there. Please make sure to like and subscribe. Now back to the show.
But that being said, that's what I mean. It's so hard to have all prog to all people, because prog, by its definition, is kind of genre bending and kind of going between different genres and blending jazz and rock and pop and funk and alternative and like fusion and
but it's
metal. But it's none of those things, but it's all those things. You know what I mean? That's what's tough. And in the case of Chon and Polyphia, it doesn't even have to have any melody.
Right.
So it's
But you know what? I'm glad that Polyphia and Chon exist.
Oh, for sure. I agree.
I'm very glad they exist.
I'm always happy to see people pushing the bounds of their instruments and doing things that are legitimately creatively interesting guitar playing. I just wish that there was like songs there. Yeah. You know what I mean? That's the thing same with Animals as Leaders. It's the same thing. I could listen to what they're playing and be fascinated by what they're doing. And like, that's really cool. And I like that riff. And that's interesting how you put those time signatures and how you're doing this. The harmony is interesting, and the way you're,
And the key word is interesting. I think for anyone who's in any creative pursuit, the only kiss of death is to be
boring,
is to be boring. Yeah, that's right.
But I think that the thing that's tough about those bands, though, is if you listen to one or two songs, you kind of heard it almost reminds me of Yngwie. It's like, okay, you kind of heard what they do. That's their thing.
Oh,
you know what I mean?
I love Yngwie.
Yeah, I love Yngwie too. But it's like if you heard Rising Force or Marching Out, you've pretty much heard what Yngwie does. You know what I mean? That's his thing.
Oh well, sure.
Yeah.
And so there's a good question. So, like, how far should an artist divert into other territory? Yeah.
Well, Rush showed us that you can go pretty far. I mean, you can do anything.
Right,
Really.
you can do Power Windows, and it's
and 2112, Press of Steel, and Presto. Right? I mean, you can do all that and still be Rush and still sound like Rush. They didn't not sound like Rush anymore. They totally sound like Rush, but it's Rush doing this. You know what I mean? And I can't think of too many other bands like that who were able. I think Yes did the same thing, and Genesis too. Really, they had the kind of their early, very prog version of that band, and they actually had a few hits. I've Seen All Good People. Yours Is No Disgrace. There's a few songs in that early prog era that were big radio hits, right? Roundabout, that kind of thing. And then they had the 80s period where they did like the 90125 with Trevor Rabin on guitar, which is my favorite era. Huge Trevor Rabin fan. I love Trevor Rabin. And I'm more of a fan because they had more like ballsy rock.
You're rabid for Rabin.
Exactly. I'm rabid for Rabin.
You're raving about Rabin.
I love Trevor Rabin's playing. I think he's a brilliant guitar player. There's a great solo record too called Can't Look Back or something like that. It's really, really great. Anyway, I'm a huge fan of that. And I like the Steve Howe era of Yes too.
Steve Howe's such a monster player.
But I think he didn't have that like rock thing, whereas Trevor Rabin could totally rock and had like the modern chops. You know what I mean? So you kind of sound like a guitar player who was in the 80s. Like, whereas when you listen to Steve Howe, he sounds like a guitar player from the 70s. Even now, he still sounds like a guitar player from the 70s.
Yeah.
Which is not a problem. It's just I kind of being a kid who listened to...
It's not a problem. Sorry.
Portmanteau. All right. And Genesis was the same thing. Like, Genesis had a few, like, kind of minor hits with Peter Gabriel. I mean, a lot of people aren't even aware Peter Gabriel was in that band. And then when they got Phil Collins, they just started having these massive hits. And then by the time the 80s rolled around, it became almost like a soft rock band. They were just playing all these ballads and hits, which were great songs. I'm not trashing those songs. I'm just saying that
who used to be kind of proggy was Scorpions.
Yeah, way back. Yeah.
During the Uli John Roth era.
Psychedelic almost too, in a way.
Yeah, just about, man. Like Sales of Charon and, oh, man.
Yeah, they had all kinds of really interesting boundary pushing stuff they were doing with that for sure. And then obviously just like a lot of those bands we talked about, they kind of found their commercial groove in the 80s, and everything kind of got more streamlined.
Do you think that's a product of quote selling out, or is it you know what?
I think that's a false thing because you can't sell out. Like if everybody had the magic key to write songs everyone's going to love, they would be doing it all the time. There's no selling out. You just wrote great songs and they happen to be in the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
There's no selling out involved. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think selling out is a pretty, like if you ever sold your music for money and profited, then you can't sell out after that because you're already in the business.
Just because you wrote great songs everyone loves doesn't mean you sold out. That doesn't.
Unless you're Metallica.
I know this is another place.
In which case, it's not okay. It's not okay at all.
I think with Scorpions though, like it's really all the bands we just mentioned, like Genesis, Yes, Scorpions. Those guys all had like 2 years. I'll throw Fleetwood Mac, even though
Fleetwood Mac, with Peter Green. Yeah,
they had a whole earlier era that no one even knew about. He was a fan of like what they consider the classic period of that band. They kind of didn't even know. Oh, I didn't know that was even a thing.
Yeah, dude, the green Monalishi man with the 2-pronged crown.
What's funny about Deep Purple is like that too. But their early incarnation was the band that everyone thinks of. They don't realize there was a later version of the band.
Oh yeah,
like versions of the
band.
Knocking
on your back door. Deep Purple.
Yeah, talking about like the Mach 2, Mach 3. Like who's the one everyone knows? Mach 3, like the Glenn Hughes Coverdale version.
Yeah,
that kind of thing. And Tommy Bolin version. You know what I mean? There's all these different versions of Deep Purple, but no one knows about those versions. They're not sort of hardcore.
Because they just know the Machine Head version.
Yeah, they just know the one that everyone knows.
Which is also awesome.
Yeah, exactly. But that's
so awesome.
It's one of those bands where it's almost the opposite. Like the second incarnation of that band became the classic incarnation of that band. And then anything after that, no one even really knows about.
Yeah.
Whereas the Scorpions, like the 80s clear is like the one everyone knows when they think the Scorpions. Blackout, Rocket Like a Hurricane, No One Like You.
Yep.
And then everything before that's just the part that nobody knows. And
if there's anything great about our modern era, it's so I remember being younger and getting your hands on any Uli John Roth stuff was difficult, right? I mean, good luck finding a copy of For the United States.
Or Tokyo Tapes.
Or Tokyo Tapes or any of that, right? And,
Well, because you can find tons of Scorpions records. I mean, all over the place.
Oh, totally. Well, I know those bands where they're one of the reasons I play guitar.
Yeah, Scorpions are great, man.
Great.
And the thing is, I don't think one thing that's lame about, and Van Halen, same thing. Most fans of bands feel like they have to like pick a side. It's like, oh, I like the Uli version of Scorpions. The '80s version sucks, you know, or whatever. It's like, no, that's nonsense, dude. It was great either way. Just, enjoy both. You have both.
It's like that for most bands except Metallica.
Yeah, Sabbath, like same thing. Like they have like the Ozzy, and then you have the Dio and Tony Martin era. There's a lot of great music there. Just enjoy the great music.
I heavily encourage people to check out the Tony Martin era of Black Sabbath. Yep. It's so good.
Yes, there's the Steve Howe era, which no one can take from you. Then there's the awesome Trevor Rabin era, which is awesome too. It's great. Yep. It still sounded like Yes. It sounded like a modern Yes. Genesis, there's the Peter Gabriel kind of experimental version of Genesis, and then you have the Phil Collins more streamlined version of Genesis. And that's great too. And you can like both. It's okay to like both.
Yep.
Van Halen, sorry to tell you, they made great music with Sammy Hagar. They made awesome music with Sammy Hagar.
Yeah, they totally did. The Van Hagar era, there were great songs.
Yeah, I could see hating 5150 if it sucked, but it didn't. It was awesome. So there's no reason to hate on that. You know what I mean? And the Roth era was awesome too. So that doesn't mean you have to choose. You can still listen. You can listen to Van Halen too, and then go put on 0812 and like both. It's fine. You know what I mean? It's I don't.
Yeah, you can listen to Blizzard of Oz and Heaven and Hell and like both.
Exactly. Or then go to freaking Bark at the Moon and then No More Tears and all awesome. There's no reason that you have to choose one or the other. It's like a weird sort of I gotta. In a weird like tribalistic way, like pick my side, I'm going to defend it. It's like
totally, except for Metallica.
This is one of those places where you and I don't agree, but that's okay.
Except for Metallica. That's it.
I will accept your opinion on that if you will give me the same benefit.
Of course, dude. Of course I will, man. We can still be friends.
Yeah. So I think that Prog, I don't know. To me, it's almost a non-helpful descriptor for a band because what does that even really mean? To be prog. To me, the only thing I could think of that I would see as a common through line with all those bands is they're pushing boundaries in one way or another. They're trying to not be limited in one way or another. You know what I mean? And
for that reason, for all of our listener out there that is playing guitar, learning guitar, engaging music via the guitar, I think it's important to check out all of this music.
Yeah,
it really is. I talked earlier about growing up in a music store, being exposed to the Gentle Giants and King Crimsons and all that stuff. And I know that's in my playing somewhere.
Yeah,
I know that sensibility is in there somewhere, and I know it influenced me in ways that were healthy and positive. Yeah, so
I mean, there's never a disadvantage to being exposed to more music. Even all those years I spent studying fusion and jazz, that I ultimately decided that wasn't a path that was right for me. I'm glad I did it. That gave me not only the ability to share that knowledge with my students when I teach them that stuff. I'm trying to explain to them that you really shouldn't be playing jazz. But
but I mean, and even just listening to it, I'm a big proponent of what goes in comes out.
Yeah, it's true, and it's going to be in there somewhere. What I mean? There's some aspect of something you can take from it that's good. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's going to influence your instincts musically. And musical choices and note selection and
that's
vibe
actually
and feel.
A good point, actually, I have to say, because I think if you're very like homogenous in your musical intake, you're going to be really like homogenous in your musical output too. If you only listen to like Sabbath's first 3 records, that's all you ever listen to, then you're going to be very much one directional kind of person on the creative output side of it. You know what I mean?
I love it when a student. I had a student recently who's going to go check out. I guess New Order is playing in San Francisco.
Oh, that's cool.
And I mean, they're not proggy or anything, but. When I'm at my lesson, for at least the last 6 months, my lesson guitar has been my neon highlighter yellow Ibanez with the bright yellow pickups.
Yep.
And they brought up New Order, and of course I respect. They're one of my favorite musical groups of all time.
Nice.
And they were at the like bleeding edge of synth pop music.
Yeah.
And we're really pushing boundaries there, right? Yeah. With different sounds.
Which is kind of proggish.
Which is kind of proggy. Yeah, absolutely. Like there's I was trying to describe to my student how much I loved all their music, and like there's a song on one of their albums that starts off with the sound of frogs in stereo, like ribbiting, and then the song starts. But it's just so cool because it's a really hard right and left pan.
Yeah,
like the frogs ribbiting at each other.
So that's kind of something you wouldn't really appreciate if you're like listening on like a boombox or something. You kind of need headphones or a decent stereo system or something like that.
Yeah, and I mean so the students are always surprised when I'm like, oh yeah, I know all about that.
Yeah,
and I think it's totally cool
because you're a fan of music in general. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. absolutely.
No, we technically on every podcast trash certain things periodically, but that's okay.
We
with love. It's done with love.
Let's just say it. We trash the grunge apocalypse.
Yeah, of course, because someone has to. My God.
Well, yeah, someone has to because no one does.
Yeah.
But there's more music that I really love than there is music.
Oh yeah, and I think there's an old thing that's true about politics too: is you shouldn't define yourself by what you hate, but by what you love. You know what I mean? And I think that is something that I think is true when it comes to music too. And I do appreciate a lot of fusion. Like I do like Mavision Orchestra, and I do like Al Di Meola and Return to Forever, and I do like some of the Weather Report stuff.
Ooh,
and
yeah,
I think
good
that's good stuff. And but it's not my favorite. And I think what it came down to, I had to give myself at a certain point permission to realize that I just like rock. I want to hear some ballsy, heavy electric guitars in there. I don't want to hear like this lilting thing. I want it to be ballsy and heavy.
Or with lots of ovaries.
Yeah, exactly. But you know what I mean? I wanted to hear I had to actually get it's so funny to say this, like when I was in my late teens, early 20s, I was going to music school. It's one of those things where I kind of felt like they made me feel bashful about being a metal guy. And then at a certain point, I was probably 21, I'm like going, oh no, it's cool to love the Scorpions and Van Halen. That's cool.
Yeah.
I don't need to feel bashful about that. That's where my heart is. You know what I mean?
I think that's a major impetus for our podcast, just overall, is that you don't need to be a shame guy.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. And I think it's so funny, man. I think I've had this discussion on this podcast before, but people saying like, well, I started and I was into like Zeppelin and Van Halen and Sabbath, but now I'm listening to like Weather Report. And now it means I've progressed, or I'm like really into like singer-songwriter. I listen to a lot of like James Taylor, and that's kind of where I'm at now. And I always think, oh, that's a shame.
Or I'm into punk.
Yeah. I had a conversation with my sister-in-law the other day. She came over and she was telling me how she went to a punk show. And I was like, oh, that's great. That's so fun. And
you got in a time machine and went back to 1981?
Well, I know. It was like some punk band that pop punk band that she grew up in.
Is there any other kind?
She's about 5 years. She's about 5 years younger than me. So she's like in that sort of thing. And she went with her friend to and she went and did mosh pitting and stuff. Which is, when you got kids and you're in your 40s, that's like a big deal to go do that.
Yeah, right.
I'm like, how wonderful is that? And then she's like, oh, what do you think? I'm like, yeah, I don't like punk. I hate punk. It's my least favorite kind of music. You know what I mean? It's terrible. There's no I told her all the reasons why, and then I felt bad afterwards.
Well, it's kind of so it's like the old saying, when you know better, you do better.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Well, you know what? I would never steal that joy from her that she had from going there. Because totally. It wasn't, we talked about this before, it wasn't about the music. It's about what that experience means to her. You know what I mean? That the freedom and the youth of being able to just go and mosh pit with people and stuff. It wasn't at all about the music, which to me is antithetical to my very being. Like, it should only be about the music. You know what I mean? If the music isn't awesome, I don't really care about anything else.
You know what? I grew up listening to the Misfits too. I dig it. I like Danzig better.
Yeah.
But I mean,
John Christ was a better guitar player, that's for sure.
John Christ signed my get out of school note at the NAMM show in 1996.
That's awesome.
I came home.
I was at that same show when I was a student at MI.
He came home and I took the suspension.
Ah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Keep it. Yeah, that's awesome.
He was super cool guy.
I've never been into punk though. I've always looked at, like, kind of what we said before, like, why are we looking at this mediocre stuff? And
it's kind of for, I think, for guitar players, it's training wheels.
There's so much better training wheels out there. I mean, Zeppelin and Sabbath and Scorpions could also be training wheels.
Well, I mean, by the time you're playing, well, maybe not some early Sabbath stuff. Yeah, early Sabbath stuff is good training wheels.
Sweet Leaf, thinking about Paranoid. Those are very training wheelsy songs. You know what I mean?
Yeah, Paranoid. I mean, you have to be able to count.
That's true, I guess. But I mean,
you really do.
But you're not asking for the moon, though. You just
sometimes you are.
I don't know, man.
Counting that, yeah, dude, knowing where the changes are in Paranoid is very hard for some people.
Yeah, okay.
So I would say it requires, it's a lot easier than if you were just playing.
It's not physically difficult to play. That's what I'm trying to say.
No, it's not physically difficult. Well, a lot of down picked, muted power chords.
That's true. That's something I actually just had recently with a student of mine, trying to explain to him how to do palm muting and power chords. And for some reason, the palm seat starts coming off. Like, no, keep your palm there. Nope. Keep your palm there. Don't move it forward when the chord moves forward. Keep it right in the same spot.
Yeah, I've noticed a lot of new guitar players. They hover their picking hand over the bridge.
Yeah, the idea of resting your hand on the strings is very foreign to them. They have a really hard time understanding. Like, you got to keep it on there the whole time. And then what's funny is you'll start, and then it just starts raising. Like, nope, it starts raising. It's like, nope, keep it there.
I think there's something about I mean, look, you're not going to break the guitar.
Yeah, exactly.
Like there's and you need if you care about keeping it all nice and shiny and scratch free, that's the wrong priority.
Yeah, exactly.
You're going to put dings and dents and scratches in it.
Call it character, my boy.
Yeah, right. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Don't you want to relic your guitar yourself?
Yes, exactly.
But you're not going to break it.
Yes, well, hopefully not.
By playing it.
Yeah, chances are pretty good you won't break it.
If you lean it up against the wall, you're going to break it.
Yeah, well, that's I had my first guitar. Oh my god, my first nice guitar, I should say. Yeah, don't lean against the wall, kids. It's not a good idea.
If you're going to lean your guitar against something, lean its strings first against like the couch.
Yeah, or in the guitar stand. That's probably the next best.
That's the best thing.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, absolutely. So
anyway, though, is that prog music is a good representation of sort of boundary pushing rock music. That's something that I think we should all kind of look at as like the standard. That's what we should be doing. Now, I think it shouldn't be self-indulgent. I will say, as much as I'm a huge Dream Theater fan, they definitely veer into the self-indulgent territory sometimes, where they have like a 7-minute instrumental section. It kind of goes all these different places, and then they come back and they kind of paste the chorus at the end of the song, that kind of thing. And I kind of look at that and I go, okay, that could probably, if I was a producer, I could say we cut like almost all that out. You know what I mean? It's like,
yeah, there definitely could be some mission creep at some times.
So something you need to be aware of if you're a prog band. It's like, okay, how much is too much? You know what I mean? And it's big. So
it's important to still have some sort of semi-focused idea for a song.
But then the idea of prog is to give yourself some leeway to kind of go different places with it, but never losing sight of what your mission is, in that song. Does that make sense?
Yep.
I think that's the challenge, and probably a good place for us to wrap up this amazing podcast. Thank you guys so much for listening to Rock and Chill with Ryan and Scott.
Yep, go out there, listen to some music that broadens your horizons. Exactly. You're going to have to maybe even listen to it a couple of times to get used to it, because you're going to be outside your comfort zone, but that's always healthy.
You got it. So, all right, guys, please go ahead and make sure to rate and subscribe to this podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you for joining us on this amazing little prog rock. Love it.
And everybody out there, have a real proggy week.
Exactly. Thank you so much.
Peace.